So over the past few weeks, we've been looking at the life of Joseph, partly as this idea of what does it mean to be a vision chaser? Remember, Joseph was given some visions by God early on in his life. He was about 17 years old, and then it took a long, long time for those things to happen. And so what happens to us, too, when we know how life should go, when we know that justice should be served, that people should love one another, that God has this great hope for the universe, and yet we see over and over and over again obstacles or difficulties or problems or people fail and bad things happen. And so how do we maintain true to this idea that God has put something in our hearts and our minds and our lives that we should pursue wholeheartedly? And how do we continue to follow that and chase after that when there are times when it seems like those things and life just contradicts what He's told us? When obstacles come into place and it makes it difficult to continue to pursue. When all of that happened, and Joseph's life is a great example of this, right? Remember, he was 17 years old. His brothers hated him. They sold him into slavery. And he goes to work in a man's house. His name was Potiphar. He was the captain of the guard. And then Potiphar's wife makes some passes at him, and he resists, and she gets ticked off, and she accuses him in front of her husband, and Potiphar throws Joseph in prison, and then in prison, Joseph kind of rises to the top and starts to help the prison warden kind of lead all of that stuff, and a couple of Pharaoh's officials come in with some dreams, and he interprets them and says, don't forget about me, maybe that's his hope, maybe that's how he's going to get out. And sure enough, those guys get out, and they forget about him. Up and down and up and down and up and down, all through his life, right? And then all of a sudden, a couple of years later, Pharaoh has this dream. And that's when one of the officials that was in prison with Joseph remembers what happened and says, oh, I've forgotten. And here's the thing. There's a guy that can interpret your dream. So Pharaoh calls him up. This is where we were last week. And Joseph comes running out of the prison, right? Into Pharaoh's presence and has this great idea, interprets the dream, has this great idea on how to lead Egypt through all of this stuff. And Pharaoh says, you're my guy. You're my guy. Is there anyone as qualified in this land as Joseph? And everybody's like, no, he's the man. And so what happens next, and we didn't finish chapter 41 last week because we kind of ran out of time and we were focused on something else anyway. But here's what happens. Pharaoh pulls Joseph into the second in charge of all of Egypt. Okay? He gives him an entirely new life. Remember, he was just in prison the day before, and then all of a sudden, he's in charge of everything. He gives him a new car. Well, it was a chariot, right? And it was Pharaoh's second chariot. So everybody knew that Pharaoh's main chariot was Pharaoh's. But the Pharaoh's second chariot, that was now Joseph's. He gives him a secret security detail that goes before him into all of the streets. And everybody that comes in contact with Joseph, or that Joseph drives his new chariot through town, they're to pay homage to Joseph. Pharaoh gives Joseph new clothes, so he no longer looks like this peasant slave. He's got a whole new, we were talking about this in our small group Thursday night. We see over and over and over again in Joseph's life, his coat that his dad gave him got him in all kinds of trouble, and then Potiphar's wife rips his coat off, and we're like, dude, stop wearing coats, right? But here all of a sudden, Pharaoh's giving him an entirely new wardrobe, fit for royalty. I mean, talk about the best designer you could possibly think of, so that any time Joseph's in anyone's presence, they all knew this guy is important. And Pharaoh gives Joseph his ring, which, think a Super Bowl ring. And then think Super Bowl ring that has an unlimited American Express account linked to it. Because that's kind of how this went. All right? So anything in all of the land that Joseph thought he needed or wanted to do, Pharaoh's ring kind of had the PIN code to unlock it all. Pharaoh's like, here's a blank check for all of Egypt. For whatever you need to get this job done, for whatever you need just to be happy, here's my ring. Do it. Do it. Sounds pretty cool, doesn't it? And then Pharaoh says, and oh, by the way, here's a new wife for you. And up until this point in time, we don't think that Joseph had a wife. But Pharaoh gives Joseph a wife. And this isn't just any typical woman. This woman is the daughter of the priest. Now, this wasn't the priest like we know priests in kind of the Israel culture and stuff. This is priest in the way that the Egyptians knew priests. So basically, the way that you got the priest job is you were related to Pharaoh. If you're related to Pharaoh, you could be the priest. Kind of weird, isn't it? But then the priest's daughter, he gives to Joseph. So what does this mean? Well, remember, royalty would form bridges and ties with other countries and with other people by marrying off their daughters to those people. So this was Pharaoh's closest available relative at the time. Okay? Pharaoh's closest available relative. And he says, you're going to marry Joseph because I want to adopt him into this family. Basically what Pharaoh's doing is he's saying, you're one of us now. You're one of us. Pretty amazing. Because less than 24 hours earlier, Joseph's in prison. Right? And then all of a sudden, he's like running Egypt. Running Egypt. All because he knows that God's going to send a famine. And he tells Pharaoh. And Pharaoh's like, well, I believe him. He's pretty credible. So, you've got a good plan. Do it. Okay? Imagine that. So in all of this time, remember this is about 17 years later, I don't know how many years later. He was 17, somebody that does math can help us out with this. Thank you. 13 years later, see, you know, Academy cadet right there. That is our Air Force right there. Because if it was left to me, man, we'd just be like, numbers. Numbers later, you know, I don't know. So he's 17 when he's sold into slavery. He's 30 years old when he gets taken out of prison. We know that because that's what it says. So 13 years, right? I said 13 years he's been waiting for this dream, for this vision, for this thing to happen. Has it come true yet, guys? He's got everything. Right? He's got a new wife. He's got a new bank account. He's got a new car. It's a convertible. He's got a new wardrobe. He's probably got a new place to live. Has his dream become reality yet? No. Now watch this. The first how many years of this type of this part of his life? How many years did he say there was going to be great abundance? Do you guys remember? 7 years of great abundance, indicated by the healthy cows and the healthy grains of wheat, right? 7 years. So even during those 7 years of great abundance, has anything changed about his vision or his dream yet? No. It's the same. It hasn't come to reality. But he has a couple of kids. We know that he never lost his faith in God because what he names these kids is all in line with God has been good to him throughout all of this. Okay? 7 years go by. His vision hasn't become a reality yet. How many years total is that? 20. Thank you. 20 years later. And his vision hasn't become reality yet. 20 years later. That's tough, isn't it? I mean, so many of us want this to happen right away, and yet we see over and over and over again in the Bible the accounts of the people that faithfully served God. They waited a long, long time, and oftentimes, guys, the vision doesn't become reality all at once. It happens a little bit at a time, so let's jump back in and see what happens this week. Genesis chapter 42, famine hits. Famine hits. Success, 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 success. There's so much grain, it says, and at the end of 41, that Joseph can't even keep track of it anymore. There's so much he can't count it anymore. The cities are so full of the grain that they collected over the years that they can't even weigh it anymore. It's too much. And then famine hits. And it was severe. Remember, God said in the dream to Pharaoh that it will be so bad you won't even remember this abundant time. You won't even remember. And sure enough, they get going into the famine, and 42 opens up with a picture of Joseph's family, miles and miles away. And the famine is kind of spread over all of the land. And remember, Joseph's got how many brothers at this point? 11, thank you. 11 brothers at home with his dad. And then the first verse of chapter 42 says, Jacob, Joseph's dad, looks around at his boys and says, guys, what are you doing standing around here? Go get us some food. What, are you going to starve to death? Does it sound like something your dad might say to you? I mean, come on. Like, seriously, how many times as dads have we said, son, are you just going to sit around the rest of your life? Go do something, right? Go do something. I'm not going to be able to provide. And by this point, Jacob's probably pretty old. And so he says to his boys, would you guys just go buy grain? I hear Egypt's got a bunch. And so that's how this whole thing kind of starts out. We're going to skip the first couple of verses, but I wanted to bring that up because I thought it was funny. Are you going to sit around on your butts all this time, or are you going to go find us something to eat? And so he sends them off. He sends all of them except for, you know who? Benjamin. And who? Benjamin was Joseph's direct brother. Okay? All right, so we're going to pick up in verse 6. Joseph, again, we knew, was the governor of the land, the person who sold grain to all of its people. So that was Joseph's job. It shifted from when he was collecting all of this stuff, at some point, Pharaoh says to him, whenever you're ready, you just make the change. And Joseph says, well, we're going to sell this grain back to everybody. So he's just making all kinds of money for Pharaoh. Pharaoh's probably pretty happy. But he was the person that sold all of the grain to the people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground.
Dun, dun, dun.
Thank you. They bowed down to Joseph. Wait, remember the dreams. In both of Joseph's dreams, early on, his brothers and his mother and his father bowed down to him in these dreams, right? As represented by stars and sheaves of grain. They bowed down. Sure enough, they show up, and I can't even imagine. The whole area, the whole Mediterranean region is under famine. And so they call this the world. The world was under famine. That's the world as they knew it. Okay? And they're all coming to Egypt. So imagine all of the cities that are spread out. It just happens to be the one where Joseph's presiding over at the time, and his brothers stroll in. There's got to be thousands of people in the marketplace at this point, right? I mean, imagine if just little Colorado Springs. You know, it's not the biggest city in the nation by any means, right? Any stretch of the imagination. Little Colorado Springs. And we're in a famine, and your brother, Joseph, is the one that's responsible for shelling out all of the stuff that you're going to need to eat, and he happens to pick you out of the crowd of all of Colorado Springs, 500,000 people or so. 700 maybe in El Paso County. It's pretty amazing, isn't it? That he saw them. It's divine. It's not a coincidence. It happened this way on purpose because God orders everything. Sure enough, his brothers arrive and they bow down to him with their faces to the ground, just like the dream. But as soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them. And he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. Where do you come from, he asks. From the land of Canaan, they replied, to buy food. Although he recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Why? I mean, 20 years later. 20 years later. Have you looked at some? You guys aren't old enough yet, okay? But those of us that are old enough, when I look at my friends on Facebook and their profile pictures, I'm like, I don't know that I could pick them out of, and that's been about 20 years. Right? Plus, he looks like an Egyptian. He talks like an Egyptian. He walks like an Egyptian. You knew that one was coming, right? Because I am a product of the 80s. Everything about him is Egyptian now. He's got different clothes on. Everything is different. And they just don't recognize him. But let me ask you a quick question. Is the vision accomplished yet? Not quite yet. Because how many brothers showed up? 10. And the vision said all 11. And his mom and dad, right? All of his family. And this isn't quite it. He knows that. So he starts to speak harshly to them. He says, where do you guys come from? He's going to accuse them of something that's going to buy him some time here. Let's look at the next section of slides. There it is, okay. Sorry. Then he remembered his dreams about them and said, "You're spies! You've come to see where our land is unprotected." See, everything's kind of bubbling up in his mind at this point. Why do you think he accuses them of being spies? Because it's his family. And how else is he going to get them out of the marketplace? How else is he going to have a little bit of time with them? How else is he going to find out anything but to pull them aside? Plus, do you remember what happened last time he was with these guys?
He tried to kill him.
Yeah. It was not so good for him, was it? They like ripped his coat off, they tore it up, they poured animal blood on it, they threw him in a cistern. Not a cistern, a cistern. That's where, they would collect water and stuff, right? And then they were going to murder him. But one of his brothers talks him out of it and they just sell him instead. Thanks, guys. Thanks. They answer to him, "No, my lord. Your servants have come to buy food. We're all the sons of one man. Your servants are honest men, not spies." Okay. You sold me to slavery. I know who you are. I know who you were. And now you're telling me you're an honest man. Can you believe him? We don't know yet, right? He doesn't know yet. He says, "No, you've come to see where our land is unprotected." Next one.
It is next one.
But they replied, I'm not sure what's happened to me up here today. But they replied, "Your servants were 12 brothers, the son of one man who lives in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with her father, and one is no more." Who is the no more? Joseph. He's like, "Oh, yeah," but he doesn't say anything at this point, right? How many of you are good at keeping secrets? At this point, how do you keep this a secret? Like, wouldn't you be bursting on the inside? How do you not? But he had to find out. He had to find out if they were truly honest men. How does he know if he doesn't try them, if he doesn't test them? He says in verse 14, "It's just as I told you, you're spies, and this is how you will be tested. As surely as Pharaoh lives, you will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here." And immediately, these guys start to feel that whole pressure. Have you ever felt like you were being tested before in this kind of like a true character test? Like one of your friends or your parents or your sister or your brother, and they really know you, and they come up and they look you directly in the eye and say, "I'm going to find out if your character is everything that you say it is." Have you ever felt that way? Because it's hard. It pierces you right here. I remember in high school, I've told you guys a little bit about my background, right? Like my parents and I, we went to church all the time. We were always at church, anytime it was open, but I really struggled with some things about church. One of them was the hypocrisy that was in the church. It drove me crazy. I hated it. I didn't go to church for years and years and years because of that. And when I would go, in college primarily, but I would rebel against God even when I was going to church. I was really good at being a hypocrite, but I was really good at seeing the hypocrisy in everybody else too. And it ticked me off and I didn't want to have anything to do with it. And part of the time I was like, I'm just going to live the way that I want to, deal with it, because I'm not going to be a hypocrite. But I remember in high school, really struggling with this idea of truly following God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and going through the motions. And I was tired of going through the motions, and I thought, well, let's see what happens. And so in our youth group, it met like on Wednesday nights or something like that, I remember challenging the entire youth group. So here's Graham, the super rebellious kid that everybody knows all my baggage. I mean, because like I said, I didn't really hide it well. Right? And it was significant baggage. They kind of knew. I mean, when your youth leader calls your parents to tell them that you aren't behaving properly on youth events, all of the other kids already know. It's not. Usually your parents are the last to know anyway. So I'm standing up in front of this group saying, "Guys, let's do this. Let's really see. Come on," challenging them. And one girl comes up to me, and she says, "Man, I hope what you're saying is true. I hope that you're willing to change. I hope that what you are saying right now is what you truly believe and that you'll follow through on, but I guess time will tell." And I was like, right? She was right. Absolutely right. And I remember it to this day, and I don't remember a lot of stuff, okay? But I remember that. Her name was Jennifer McQuaid. She was a good friend of Trisha's. And I still don't think she likes me. I'm not exactly sure. But I'll never forget that. Because it was so penetrating and it was so tough and she was so right. Like, okay, I'm gonna test you and see, and time's gonna tell, Graham. Time's gonna tell. He says, you will be tested. As surely as Pharaoh lives, you will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. And then he forms a plan, right? Send one of your brothers to go get your other brother. The rest of you will be kept in prison so that your words may be tested to see if you're telling the truth. If you're not, then as surely as Pharaoh lives, you are spies. And he put them all in custody for 3 days. Now what's interesting is he uses the opportunity to call them spies, to pull them apart. And he's kind of got them in his separate area. And he's talking with them. He's trying to find out about his dad. How is your father? He says, how is your father? You know, and then what about this other brother? Tell me, because he knows exactly who he is. This is the first time in 20 years he's gotten any information about his family. And here they are standing right in front of him. And he throws them in prison, and he gives them about 3 days to figure out, okay, what's really going to happen? And at first he says, send one to go get your other brother. But at some point he must have changed his mind, because on the 3rd day, after he's put him in prison for 3 days, he says to them, do this and you will live, for I fear God. Again, that should have been a pretty big clue, because they're in Egypt. And Egypt doesn't even know the same God that they serve, right? But all of a sudden, this guy's using the kind of language that they would have recognized from their own father, from their own upbringing. He says, for I fear God, but it doesn't seem to tip the scales at all. He just introduces this idea of God into their thought process so they can really deal with it. If you are honest men, because they claim to have been, let one of your brothers stay here in prison, while the rest of you go and take grain back for your starving households. But you must bring your youngest brother to me, so that your words may be verified, and that so you may not die. And they proceeded to do, it says. They said to one another, surely we are being punished because of our brother. I love this, all right? Again, he's pulled them aside. They're kind of in this quiet place. He's accusing them of being spies. He's thrown them in jail for 3 days. He's come back to them. He said, okay, guys, here's the deal. I've changed my mind. Not all of you are going to stay here. One of you is going to go get your other brother. One of you is going to stay here, and the rest of you are going to, because I'm sure that your families are starving. And by this point, he kind of recognizes that they've got pretty big families. So he's going to send them back home. Okay? He's going to send them back home. And they know that part of what's happening here is happening because of God and because of what they've done. It says, this they said to one another, surely we're being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. We would not listen. 20 years later, and they haven't dealt with this yet. 20 years. They would not listen to us. That's why this distress has come on us. We saw him in his distress. It didn't change our mind. And God is bringing this back on us. And that's why we're distressed. What are we going to do? Reuben replies, didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must give an accounting for his blood. And they did not realize that Joseph could understand him, since he was using an interpreter. Isn't that a beautiful scene? They're having this conversation about everything that they did to the one that was no more, who happens to be Joseph. They're standing in a room together, and he's saying to them, guys, this is what's going to happen because I fear God. And they go, wait, God, he's allowing us to be in this distressed position because of what we did to the one that was no more. They had to see God as the one that was intervening at this point in their lives, where Joseph would never know if their hearts were truly changed or not. And he's watching, he's testing, he's waiting to see how they respond, and he's listening to their inside conversation. They don't think he can understand. But he gets it. Didn't you always want to be one of those people, and maybe some of you are? They could go into one of those restaurants that's from another country, you know, and everybody that works in the restaurant speaks that country's language. And they have conversations. Or some of you, I've heard stories, you know, when you go in and have your nails done, like the people that are doing your nails talk a lot about doing the nails. I've never had my nails done. I've heard stories. Trish did take me to have my toenails done once. I hated it. Don't ever, guys. Don't ever. No. She laughed the whole time. I was squirming the entire. She took pictures. All right? It was miserable. I don't recommend it.
Best day ever.
Completely sidetracked. Anyway, so imagine you go into a restaurant, or you're around, you know, a nail place or something, you know, and you girls kind of get a better idea. And you know that they're talking about you, but you can't understand them because you don't know the language. Haven't you ever always wanted to know the language? Like, the favorite part of some of the movies that you watch is when the people that know the other language are talking in front of the person thinking that they don't know, but that person knows the other language, and then they respond to them with the language, and then they're all embarrassed and everything else. I always wanted to be that person that could do that, right? That's what's happening here. But Joseph doesn't reveal to them that he knows what they're saying. He's just soaking it all in, listening and gathering information that's going to tell him whether or not the same God that's changed his life, that's changed his heart, that's changed his character over 20 years, has that same God worked in his brothers. Because the last time he was with them, they were evil. They were tough. They were hard people. And they did not like him. They did not realize that he could understand because he was using an interpreter pretending like he didn't know. Because it would have given it away too soon, right? Verse 24 says he turns away from them and begins to weep. Why? Because he sees that the same God that's worked in him is the same God that's convicting them, that's working in them. It's the same thing that's happening. And he's hoping. And he's probably overcome with emotion. Imagine you haven't seen your brothers in 20 years and you're not even really sure if you like them at this point because that was tough, right? 20 years later, he turns away from them and began to weep. But then he comes back and speaks to them again. He had Simeon taken from them and bound before their eyes. Why? Everything in the Bible, guys, is there for a reason. Reuben is the oldest. Reuben's the oldest. He should have kept Reuben because it was very important back then that there was a lineage and a pecking order. And Reuben was the oldest. They should have kept Reuben. Why didn't he keep Reuben? Remember what Reuben just said? Yeah, Reuben's like, I told you guys not to do this. Did Joseph have that information before? No, he didn't. He didn't know. That Reuben was the only one that stuck up for him in the midst of that. Well, we should kill him. And Reuben's like, no, let's throw him in the cistern. And Reuben was going to come back later on and rescue him, but they sold him before Reuben got back. Remember, well, Joseph didn't know any of that. He's in the cistern. Apparently, there's not good hearing places down there, right? So he doesn't know. So he takes Simeon. Who's Simeon? Second oldest. That's right. Second oldest. Second oldest. Now, why is this family important? Because this is the 12 tribes of Israel. Remember Jacob, their father's name is changed to Israel. This is the family. This is kind of the lineage that God said, this is my people. And in the Old Testament, all throughout the scripture, it was important. You were in based on who you were related to. So all of these 12 brothers, okay, they mattered. It was important to be related to. And each one of them has kind of an interesting story that you can read about throughout the whole thing. That's why this stuff matters. Simeon, the second oldest, was taken from them and bound before their eyes. And Joseph gave, this is amazing, Joseph gives orders to fill their bags with grain and to put each man's silver back in his sack and to give them provisions for this journey. Okay? This doesn't sound like punishment, does it? If he truly believes that they're spies, he probably would have kept them all there and sent one back, don't you think? But somehow he's flipping things around again. He's trying to get some more information out of them. The money that they brought with them to buy grain to save their lives, and their family lives is returned in the sacks of the grain that they just bought. Okay? So imagine going to McDonald's for lunch today and ordering your Happy Meal. Okay? And you hand the first window lady your money, and when you pick up your Happy Meal on the other side and you open the happy box to eat your happy food, your money is back in there. Would you be surprised?
Yes.
What would you do at that point?
I'd keep it.
Yeah. Right? Probably. I mean, because, come on, McDonald's people, really, it's all automated. You don't even have to issue change. You push a button and it spills it out. He gives orders to fill their bags. Keep that in mind, though, because I'm gonna come back to that here in just a second. He gives orders to fill their bags with grain, each man's silver back in his sack, and give them provisions for their journey. So he's given all their money back, he's given them the grain, and he's saying, and here's a sandwich for you to eat along the way. Now, it's a lot of days' journey, okay, so it's probably more than a sandwich, it's probably a big deal. They loaded their grain on their donkeys, they didn't look in the grain bags, and they left. Look what happens next. At the place where they stopped for the night, one of them opened his sack to get feed for his donkey, and what happens? He sees everything in there. Now if you're these guys, and not Michael over there ordering a Happy Meal, okay? If you're these guys that have just been accused of spying out the land, that have just been given your freedom to go prove that you're not spies, that have had a terrible encounter with Pharaoh's right-hand man that's kind of the governor of all of Egypt, accusing you of these things, throwing you in jail for 3 days, and then you open your sack and you see all of the money that was supposed to buy, what would you do? How did it get there? I mean, you'd be looking at your 11 brothers going, did you steal this? I mean, wouldn't you? I would. I'd be like, who did this? How do you explain it? It doesn't make any sense. Maybe the person dealing out the grain is kind of like a McDonald's employee and just messed up and put it up. Really? Because it had to be pounds and pounds and pounds of silver. Verse 28, my silver's been returned, he says to his brothers. Here it is in my sack. And their hearts sank, literally melted out of their chests. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Because what happens? If they return it, Joseph's going to accuse them of being thieves. If they don't say anything about it, Joseph's going to be ticked off because they're not honest men that they said they were. What's going to happen? I love this story. Their hearts saying, what is this that God has done to us? What is this that God has done to us? What is God doing? What have we done? Well, they know what they've done. And God's bringing it out. There's a couple of things that we have to get through before we end here. But at the end of this story, they return home. You know, the 9 brothers, less Simeon and Joseph, who's been dead for a while. Benjamin's already at home. And Reuben explains to his dad, hey, Dad, can we talk for a second? Like, here's what happened. And he sells it. You guys can read this story on your own because we don't have time to go through it all here. He sells it in an incredibly positive way, like, woo, you know, hey, and we just have to bring your Benjamin back. And Jacob's like, no. Not gonna happen. Not gonna happen. And if you're not sure why, man, spend some time worrying about Jacob's life. Because you know, Jacob worked for 7 years thinking he was going to get one girl, and he was tricked. Which is funny, because Jacob was a tricker. That's what he did to other people. And his father-in-law tricked him, married the ugly daughter to him, right? The daughter that he knew was never going to get married to anybody else. So Jacob wakes up. This is a great story. I mean, read it. It's hilarious. He wakes up in the morning. He's like, oh, you're not who I thought you were. But it's too late. So then he makes another deal. He works for another 7 years for Rachel, the one true love in his life. 14 years for one woman, guys. Wow. She must have been something, right? 14 years for one woman. And he has 2 kids. One of them's Joseph, and one of them's Ben. And Rachel, his love of his life, the one that he spent 14 years, she dies. And then Joseph goes missing, but he thinks dead. So all that's left is Ben. Does it make any sense why he would say, no, you can't have him too? Because guys, every time I send you out together, you come back with one less son. Right? Seriously, what's going on here? And it's incredible, and God uses, aren't you glad He uses imperfect people to do His stuff? So let's finish this. Their eyes, their hearts sink. They explain to their dad what's going to happen, and there's a famine. They got all of the money back. They got the grain that they were sent after, but now what are they going to do? And Jacob said, "You're not taking my son. You're not taking my son back there." No, and that's where it ends. Now here's what we have to talk about today, because these are all great stories until it comes to relating to our lives today. And if this stuff is really God's word to us, revealing stuff to us about how we need to live our lives and what we can expect, especially when it comes to the vision stuff, there's a couple of things that we have to know, and they're not easy things. There's some pretty hard truths in the Bible. I wish it was just all fun and games and love and grace, but it's not all that. It's truth, and it's holiness, and it's righteousness, and there are things to it that matter. It matters how we live our lives, and it matters what we do while we wait. And the truth is that vision takes time to come to pass. And during that time, when it's coming to pass, God is working on us. We've seen Him work on Joseph's life, and we're seeing Him work on his brothers' lives right now. See, it doesn't happen overnight. Even now, some 20 years later, we don't know how far into the famine they were, so we really don't have a good idea of how many years it really took. Is Joseph's vision realized yet? No. Not completely. Not completely. It's about to be. It's coming. It's close. And sometimes that's true with us too, is you can nearly taste it. It's right there. And then every day you wake up and it's just a little, it's like the carrot on the end of the stick trying to get your cart to go down the road, right? Just a little bit out of reach, just a little bit out of reach. And see, guys, the vision doesn't become reality overnight. It takes time. God deals with our character and development. God works to change our lives, our attitudes, and behaviors over extended periods through prolonged circumstances, even revisiting the errors of our past. 20 years have gone by. These guys, they haven't really dealt with that, have they? We saw it again this week. That secret sin from years past does not stay hidden, does it? It doesn't stay down. Guys, that's why it's important for us to be faithful and to live for God even when we don't think anybody's watching. Because God is. He knew what happened in the field that day with Joseph. He knew that he had to address it with these guys. He knew. It didn't stop. So God goes back, even revisiting the errors of our past. And the change will eventually become obvious when we submit to Him. It takes longer than we hope or expect. The next thing that we have to remember that I want to leave with you is that Joseph was always under authority. We live in a country that touts independence as the #1 value. Freedom, independence, autonomy, me. Nowhere in our culture do we talk about how cool it is to submit to anything. Do we? Yet over and over and over and over again, we see that Joseph, who is a great model for us of how we are to live, was always in second place. Always in second place. Never in first. When he was at home with his father, he was under his father's authority. When he was working in Potiphar's house, he was under Potiphar's authority. When he was thrown into prison, he was under the prison warden's authority. And now, as the ruler of Egypt, he's still under Pharaoh. Because you know what? Jesus was under authority too. God's authority, the Father's authority. He said, I don't do anything without God's approval when he walked on the earth. I never lift a finger until I've consulted God. That's what Jesus said. And then Jesus turns around and he says to all the apostles, which is for us years later, he says, no servant is above his master. So if you're here today and you've never submitted to the authority of God in your life, you're missing out. If you're here today and you've gone through these times where you sometimes have submitted it, but other times like, I'm going to do what I want, and I've been there, I get it. You're missing out. See, the model for us is always under authority. So even when you're independently wealthy, you've got millions of dollars in the bank, and you can live forever without anything, you can't live forever without God. We all fall under His authority. We're not meant to be in first place. It's not always easy, but it's always true. Are you here today? Have you submitted to God's authority in your life? Have you allowed Him to be your Potiphar, to be your prison warden, to be your Pharaoh? Are you willing to follow Him? Are you willing to allow Him to have access to your heart and your soul and your mind and your past and your future and your present and say to you, these are the things that you need to deal with, because if you're going to be like me and chase that vision, you have to be willing to submit to Him. Where's your heart? Is it submitted? Let's pray.